Everybody, welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. We're going to be talking all about back to school, and we have an expert, J.D. Rothman, who is talking about her book, The Neurotic Parent's Guide. I guess that makes you being an expert on being neurotic parent. Is that
Correct. Yeah, actually, I have no expertise other than that.
I'm right there with you, though. I think I may be at the PhD level now in terms of being a neurotic parent. Okay, so what I was trying to figure out what the visual image when I think of like what happens to me because I have a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old. So I have a
Oh,
junior
yeah,
who's
you're right
just
in there.
who's just entering us and I found it really interesting because when I was reading your book, I was laughing and then getting nervous, and then laughing nervously throughout the whole
I'm
book.
sorry. I've heard that from a lot of people, and I
Oh, well,
apologize.
you don't have to apologize anything, but I think what is interesting is that you can be a calm, balanced, rational person, and then when you start reading like what other parents are doing, there's just this general, for me personally, there's this general sense of anxiety, like I should be doing something differently, I should be doing more, or what I'm doing is wrong.
And the worst is when you say I should have done something differently 4 years ago.
Yeah,
And
exactly,
like,
exactly.
why didn't I put her in fencing instead of soccer?
Yeah, I find it.
Because now everyone plays soccer, but fencing would have been unusual.
I know. Well, it's kind of it's it's the first game that we have to play in life, right? It's just the game, the ultimate game of fitting in is how do we get ourselves into these prestigious schools?
Well, we don't have to play that, and you bring up a great point. I mean, there are actually 3,500 schools in this country, and that's not including some great schools in other countries where Americans can go.
Hmm.
But sadly, a lot of parents want their kids to go to about 25 of those schools, and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's where the problem lies. I was just reading about 30 colleges that have the lowest acceptance rates. I mean, the lowest acceptance rates after they accept kids, admissions rates,
Hmm.
acceptance from the kids. And a lot of them were really excellent schools. And
Yeah.
so if you want to go to, one of them was Ithaca, and which is a
Ithaca
great
College,
school. Yeah, and one of them was Drexel, which is
Pennsylvania.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has a co-op program where you'll actually get a job. You'll be
I love
paid to have
that.
a job, and then you can move into that. So those two happen to be on this list of very low acceptance, I mean, admissions rates after kids are accepted. But the problem is that it's become, parents have seen it become a parenting badge to go to one of 25 or one of 30 what they consider prestigious schools, and they may not always be the right fit for
Mm,
kids.
I think that's a perfect way of putting it because it is a parenting badge, right? Because
Uh-huh.
if oh my son went to Harvard, you think oh
Right.
yay you did a good job, and if my kid didn't, it's a oh were you involved in the process?
Right. Well, it's not even that. It's kind of like, well, I just guess he wasn't that smart,
Yeah.
and everything has shown that that's not true. That plenty of kids go to other schools, including all our great state schools in this country, that are just as smart as kids who go to Harvard. And
Hmm.
in fact, getting into Harvard now is a complete crapshoot.
Yeah.
There's and Stanford fits on that list, and so does Yale and
Hmm.
MIT. I mean, do they turn down? They pride themselves in saying that they turn down as many qualified kids as they accept.
Yeah. That's so yay, aren't I great? Okay, so
So,
what's
but
a
you're right that one you brought up one point about like suddenly parents become neurotic, like even people who were relatively calm. I mean, I don't know if I was that calm before, but I was not a helicopter mom. I was late to picking up the carpool. I didn't look at their homework. I let them wander around the neighborhood. I allowed them some independence.
yeah.
But when I went on the tour and the first college tour with my older son and ran into these parents who had been putting their kids in unusual activities and whose kids had discovered a galaxy or founded an orphanage or invented an antibiotic. By the time they were 15, my kids just weren't like
Yeah,
that.
exactly. What have you been doing with your life?
Right.
Okay, that's all right. And so, what's the big picture? Like, and it seems like when what I love about your book is that it's never stated outright. So I was wondering if you could say outright, what is the balanced perspective that you want us all to have? Like, what is the big picture that we're missing?
Okay, well, the bottom line, I would say, in this process is what we sort of alluded to a minute ago, is that you can be a very happy, successful person and not go to one of those quote prestigious schools. And in fact, there are plenty of very prestigious schools that are not in the top 30, that are just in the top 100. Right. So what I tell people, and I fell into I'm a television writer, really. This is not I'm not a college counselor. Yeah. I kind of fell into this because I started an anonymous blog about how ridiculous the process was. And then my publisher, Prospect Park Books, discovered the blog. And in fact, I didn't even want to publish the book in my own name. I was paranoid my second son wouldn't get in anywhere.
Yeah, that's smart.
Well, although I found out that college counselors everywhere really love the book and they love to poke fun at the process.
Yeah.
So I would say the bottom line is to love thy safety. In other words, don't start your list by saying like, oh, I would love to go to Stanford because everyone would love that, or I would love to go to Berkeley. Instead, start by saying, University of Denver sounds great. It's a good match. Mm-hmm. I like to ski. It has a major that I like. It has a good business program. I'm interested in business, that kind of thing. And start with a school that's less competitive, that you and your child can both, and the parents should be involved. Everyone says they're not involved. That's just ridiculous. You're paying for it after all. Right. If you have a boy, they're not going to they're just, no offense to boys, but they just won't take the lead that much. So the parents at least have to be there to kind of guide their kids along. And so I would start by just with a foundation of schools that you can get into rather than schools that are dream schools.
Mm-hmm. And so I want to ask, I want to follow up on the question, the comment that you just made, that kids need to be guided a little bit. And it's interesting because I hear lots of different things as parents where it's like, oh, the guidance counselor is taking care of everything.
Right.
And then they kind of check out. And then they're like, what? Why are the Ivy League schools on this list?
I'm suing my counselor.
Yeah, I'm suing my counselor. So it's kind of an interesting thing and I do think, I have 2 boys, and I do think that.
So do I.
I think they just need to be organized a little bit.
The boys are just not as developmentally ready as the girls are. And I'm generalizing because many girls are not that excited about it either, but certainly more girls are there working through that summer between junior and senior year. They already have the list. They have their essays mapped out. Right. They've taken their extracurriculars to a new level, and the boys are just kind of, you've put the FISC guide in the bathroom and they're not even really leafing through it. Right. And then a lot of parents go on college tours with their kids the semester during spring break of junior year, which is what started my blog, and I do recommend it. People say, oh, it's better to wait till you get accepted. In the case of my boys, they both applied early, and their schools were binding where they applied.
So they wanted to be really sure that
they had to. I mean, you're going to say, will you marry me? You need to have at least seen what your spouse is going to look like.
Crying out loud.
So I say, I don't think you need to start in 9th grade other than getting them used to standardized tests, not actually throwing them in and taking the SAT, but just if you're at a school that doesn't have as many tests, every once in a while sit them down for a practice test, and you don't have to pay for that. And I think thinking about extracurriculars in 9th grade is not a bad thing. Thinking about it in 5th or 6th grade is insane, but a lot of people do that. And what people are, as I alluded to before, people are trying to outdo themselves with unusual extracurriculars. I don't think that's necessary. I think colleges just want to see kids sticking to something they're passionate about.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because my son, for a long time, has liked painting miniatures, which I thought, oh, that's exactly. The perfect, quirky, weird thing. And now he doesn't want to do it. I'm like,
no.
Are you sure you don't want to do it?
Yeah.
Because that's the perfect, quirky, weird thing.
That happened with my son. He said he wanted to study magic one summer. And I thought, oh, my God, that's an essay. That's perfect. You could talk about the first rabbit that he pulled out of the hat.
Exactly.
But then when it came down, and I actually found him a program where he could study to be a magician, he was kind of, no, I don't want to. I changed my
Well,
mind.
it's hard too because as a mom who loves my child, what I want them to do is experience lots and lots of different things and find the thing that they really, really find joy in
Right.
versus, friends who are like their kid literally has been fencing since, third grade
Hmm.
because I think it looks good and they've been putting him in further and further. Now they're like in fencing competitions and they have a
Right.
one-on-one fencing coach and it's a really hard thing because I can see I can see the logic behind doing that.
Uh-huh.
But then I think, what are you teaching a child aside from that? Their interests don't like you're teaching them that they can cultivate themselves to fit a game, which is true. But
Right.
then what about their own interests and joy?
Right. And that's exact. I think that colleges are looking. They say that they look at the application holistically, and I think they do. They can see whether a kid has been programmed or whether their accomplishments come out of some sort of organic interest.
Right.
And it's not like the college counselors. They're smart people, and they can tell when an essay is not written by a 17-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They know what the voice is.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, there are a lot of parents who have been helicoptering in general throughout their kids' lives, and so either it's very hard for them to give up, or they're like what you and I discussed, that they suddenly realize their kids are competing with with friends in their own high school, and they haven't really gone the extra mile the way those friends have.
Yeah.
I mean, one example is the science fair, like the middle
Right.
school science fair,
Okay.
and we have so many jokes about people hiring, a rocket scientist to
No.
an astrophysicist to
Oh
actually
my
help.
God.
And I remember one kid he was like a third child at the science fair, and all the parents were crowded around because he had made his own gum, and there just were a few pieces of gum stuck to a poster board, and people were so impressed with this because it was just clear that he had done it
Yeah.
completely by himself.
Yes. It's a
So,
rarity. I remember
yeah,
having similar types of things where I'm like, clearly your mom, who's an architect, put together that little 3D model because there's no way that
that's
you
right.
with glue and whatever could have done this. Um, all right, so going back to so we talked about extracurriculars. I wanted to also talk about people who have jobs. Like, what if you need to pay for college? You have a job. Is that interesting? Do you think?
Yes, I have that in the book. I mean,
Yeah.
I call it summer conundrum. And so the question is, do you spend
Right.
five or six, seven, or $8,000 to send your kid to Brown, where they have a fantastic program, but
Right.
then it's not a selective program. Anyone can go,
Right.
or they can go to Costa Rica and build a school, or they can just stay home and work at Jamba Juice.
Right.
And a lot of the colleges are at the point where they respect that kid who's working at Jamba Juice.
Right.
Not that those other programs will keep you out, but I don't think that they necessarily will get you in.
Ah, okay. So like the parents who think like, oh, this is going to be a juicy little tidbit
Right.
in the essays, like it's just as good to talk about how the guy at my work associate at Jamba Juice was hitting on me and I hated it. Like that's probably
Well, I wouldn't
just
go there, not into that,
yeah,
but maybe how you loved strawberries at the beginning of the summer, and now you're really sick of them, something
yeah,
like that. That would be a great essay.
right,
And the Costa Rica thing, I have a joke about, like, just to avoid the whole isthmus of Central America, basically, because first everyone was going to Africa, and then they realized that
right,
that was a bit much. So
right.
Central America is actually very not so expensive to get to, and there's some great community service programs there. But I think a lot of college counselors have just gotten sick of reading about
Yeah.
Guatemala and
Yeah, and
Costa
whose
Rica.
lives you saved and all that. And the other thing
Yes,
I love in your book is like you could have spent $6,000 taking your kid to Costa Rica, or you could have taken that money and actually fed 50 families. It's
right.
like, I thought that was fascinating, or just a great point. Okay, so one of the things I was thinking about grades. And because I'm definitely I'm not, I don't know if I'm an expert, but I'm there right there with you in being a neurotic parent. And my son got a B plus,
Oh, the
and
end of the world.
I thought, oh honey, you can't be doing many of
Right.
those. Go
Well,
talk to the
they say
teacher.
the B is the Asian F.
Yeah, exactly. But you gotta go talk to the teachers. Like I don't want to talk to the teacher, and I said, why wouldn't you talk to the teachers? Like I just don't want to be like one of those people who talks to the teachers. And I was like, wow.
Well, that's something that is just that's actually epitomizes how ridiculous this has become, because
I
B actually means good. And from our day, if you remember, if you got a B, it meant good. I mean, my husband the other day, my kid, not the other day, but when they were applying, they asked him where else he applied besides UCLA, and he said nowhere. And they said, well, Dad, how did you know you were going to get in? And he said, well, I had my 3.0. And so in those days, you needed
right.
a
That's
B
it.
average to get into UCLA. Now you
Exactly.
can't even get in with a 4.5
I
if you
know.
live in LA. So that's something that's happened in pretty much all the high schools, like including even the progressive ones, where there's this great inflation that when the kids get to college and suddenly they get a B plus, they're freaking out. And that happened with my younger son, where he came home and got his grades the first semester, and he said, Mom, I got a B plus. And I said, well, that's fine. And he said, no, I'm going to email the professor. And the professor emailed back saying, like, well, I think that's a very good grade. Congratulations. And, he showed how
I know.
he averaged it.
But here's the thing that's worrisome to me is that there's no room for error, right? You
Right.
had a bad test, it tanked your grade, you were at an
Right.
A minus or an A, now you're at a B plus, and now you've actually cleaved off like 20 schools that you. I mean, that's the thing that. Am I
Right.
exaggerating? That's what it feels like.
You're not exaggerating, although there are always exceptions. When I first wrote the blog, not the book, I got a call from a mom who's asked me who I sort of knew, but I didn't know her that well, from our school, and she wanted to meet for lunch, and she burst into tears at the beginning of the lunch and said her daughter had just gotten a C in calc. And I said, oh, where is she applying? And she said, Berkeley. And that is the end of the world, because
Yeah.
they do look at a formula, and they basically throw out grades that aren't up to snuff. And I said, well, why did she get that C? She said, well, she was up late. She had been performing, her dance troupe had been performing in the Bay Area for a senior citizens home, and blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, maybe it's worth just sending a note. Like, it can't hurt.
Right.
And the girl did get into Berkeley. So
Yeah.
it's not,
Okay, so it's not
yeah.
the end of the world.
No, I mean, if you get two Ds, it's not good.
Yeah.
But if you have one C on your whole record, or if you have one B certainly is not going to make it or break it.
Okay,
So,
so I went to Duke, and
oh, that's where both of my boys went.
they did? Okay, excellent.
Yes.
All right, so we were, and you called it the Golden Retriever School. I was a little bit insulted when you
Wait,
said
did I?
that. Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes, you called it the school for golden retrievers. I was like,
Oh, because it's the name. That's the name of a gold. That's what you would call your dog.
oh, it's Duke. Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
And
Okay.
especially if you go to Duke. In fact, I'm on a Duke Facebook page for parents right now.
Oh, you
And
are?
yeah, because I still have one son there. One of them has graduated, and he's doing really well. He
Okay.
did get a good job. And the other one is still there. And on this Duke Facebook page, there were about, I'd say, 40 people whose dogs are named Duke.
That's sad.
So,
Okay, so I went to the head of admissions came in and he said, sir, hey, welcome, thank you for coming. And he said, first I want to tell you that none of you would ever have gotten into Duke if you applied
yes.
today. And we're like, yeah, thanks a lot, And then he said, let's go through this applicant. And we're going to go through this applicant, and it's, everything was blacked out. And he said, we're going to go through this applicant, and I'll tell you what I look at when I'm an admissions officer. And he said, okay, I'm looking, okay, this kid, dad is a PhD. These are two like middle, these are two upper middle class families. They probably went to good schools. Okay, got it. All right, he's gotten, he's captain of his lacrosse team, won a bunch of speech and debating kind of things. That's good. And then he's like, let me look at, and he's looking at the transcripts. He's like, there was an A minus. Just went through, and I was like, oh god. And then he gets to the scores, and the scores are like 700, 800 on your SATs, and I mean, I was just depressed after that whole experience. And
then did he get to the next kid, and he said, well, this kid's a ninth generation farmer, and his parents never went to college.
Yeah, and he's in.
Yeah.
He's in. So we said at the end, did this kid get in? No. And then that's when I was ready to slash my wrist. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
like this is ridiculous. This kid who's like glowing
Yeah.
recommendations with these incredible scores still didn't get in. So it was a little bit depressing. So,
At our school, at our high school, they had a mock college applicant night where officers came from 7 or 8 different schools, and you saw exactly what you said, transcripts, because the school says they look at the whole transcripts, not just the grades. They're looking at 4 or 5 or 6 different aspects of the kid. And the woman who ran our session was from Williams, which is arguably the most competitive liberal arts school. And we went through all the kids, and they were just like what you said. And in the end, she said that we said, who would you admit? And she said, I have to tell you, we couldn't have admitted any of these kids.
That's depressing.
And the reason with that group was the scores, that they actually had a score in mind for the SATs or the ACTs now, which are just as good, that gets you on the dance floor.
So that's what I'm thinking. I'm imagining they have like a little algorithm, like your application comes in electronically. It gets screened based on the numbers. Like if it's like lower than 3.5, delete the whole application.
No, I don't think they delete it. They still read it.
They do?
Yeah.
And then I think, okay, well, if your SATs are below this, they just cleave it off. I mean, they have to. I mean, I would just like go already send letter of not accepted.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think first of all, there are always exceptions.
Yeah.
Because and also when you hear a mean SAT number, like even at Harvard.
Yes.
Let's say you hear that their average SAT is 2280 or something. That means that's average. That's what average means. So that means that there are kids that got in with a 2100.
Right.
And in fact, there are kids that even probably got in with below that. Right. So that's one area of glimmer of hope. Another one is that every year there's something called fairtest.org. And every year there are new colleges that sign up and say, you know what, we're just as sick as these tests as you are. And like this year, GW is one of them, George Washington, which is a great school.
Yeah.
And well, that's one of those schools that became great because Georgetown was in the same city and no one could get into Georgetown. And so GW became the next school that everyone wanted to go to. It's right next door to the White House. It has fantastic programs. Yeah. And they don't require SATs anymore.
Okay, so fairtest.com, check that out. And then
.org.
And you'll see the schools that don't require testing. Okay, so I did want to ask you about testing because I was a little bit dismayed and shocked, actually, when you were talking about these tutors who made a ton of money tutoring.
Yeah, why are we doing this, right?
Yeah, well, I understand why we're doing this. Well, okay, here's my...
No, I mean, why are we doing any other job?
I know, than being a tutor at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's lots of tutors out there. There's one-on-one tutors. There's, like you said, the rock star tutors in your region. Each of them will have, like my son was preparing for the math subject matter 2 test.
Right.
And his friend was going to like the subject matter test guy that got like every single time he's gotten an 800 and he'll guarantee you will get an 800, like that kind. And I'm sure they're paying like, I don't know how many, $200 an hour.
In LA, that wouldn't even cut it. I mean, in LA, it's probably an average of $350 an hour, but there's some that are getting $900 an hour or $900 a session. The sessions are a little longer.
Okay, that's just crazy. All right, so going back to tutoring, so there's tutoring, there's Princeton Review, there's now all these online sources. Do you have a sense after talking to all these parents, what are the pros and cons of each of those? Is there a solution that's best?
Well, that's a really complicated question because in certain areas, like where I live, it's the tutors that have the best track record are charging the most money. Although a lot of them will work pro bono for scholarship kids or whatever. Yeah. But so one idea that if you feel like your child really needs a tutor, and it's perfectly fine to do that because they're not in many schools, certainly the schools my kids went to, which was a progressive arts-oriented school, they were not used to taking these kind of tests. So one thing is you can hire a virtual tutor who's in a less expensive part of the country. And I actually say that in the book, like go to somewhere like Chicago where it's just not as crazy.
Right.
and or it sounds like Seattle's not as crazy if it's only 200.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
so that's
not
one
900. Oh my
right.
God.
So that's one thing. Also, a lot of the books that are out there are fantastic. So if your kid is disciplined, or even if they're not disciplined, you might want to just hire a high school student, an older high school student. Well, if your kid is a junior, to sit there with him and make sure that he's or she is going through 20 minutes a day. They say 20 minutes a day. Answer those questions. Immediately check your answers. That works. That's a magic formula. That's sort of what a lot of the tutors use. We're very lucky compared to our day where, everything's online, everything's in books. You have access to hundreds and hundreds of real exams. So if your kid can do that and
Have the discipline.
have the
20
discipline
minutes a day, do the tests.
and check the answers though. Don't wait till the next day because they say that there's something about going to sleep knowing what answers you missed or the ones you got right and wrong that will help. Now would I trust that as the only method? I don't know. My kids both needed about 6 sessions of expensive tutoring, and they were for my older son. He was always math came very easily to him, but he had issues with the reading comprehension. His score went up unbelievably well with a guy named Tutor Ted. I'll do a little plug for him. He also has books.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like he had 100 sessions with Ted. It was just 6 or 7.
That's how come it's like 6 or 7 sessions with the tutor, and you can actually find pretty big results. And that versus like doing a Kaplan, because the Kaplan and Princeton review, it seems like people go kind of berserk there. That seems to me the neurotic parent choice of
choice. I mean, the thing is there, you're not going to know who your individual tutor is. So let's say someone has said to you, well, Jordan, who works at Princeton, is amazing, then that might be okay. I mean, the methods they use, I don't know if anyone's are better or worse than others. I can't really say about Seattle. I mean, one thing about this guy, Tutor Ted, was he has a PhD in education. He knew he wasn't an actor like the place that charges $900. You looked at the bios of these people and they were actors. And of course that would make them personable.
Pretending to be teachers.
Exciting, yeah. But that was their background. They really didn't have, they were people that had gone to the Ivies themselves and had scored highly themselves. But does that qualify you to tutor a kid? I'm not so sure. So I would, if you are going to hire a tutor, I would put some time into getting recommendations, and that's easy to do. Don't ask the people your age because they're all freaked out. I mean, with kids your age. Ask the people with older kids, and especially if you know your kid wants to go to Dartmouth and you know of a tutor the kid ended up at Dartmouth. I mean, that's a no-brainer to try to talk to them. And those tutors, the SAT tutors, a lot of people want to get separate college counselors, but very often if it's a really disciplined kid, they just need someone to kind of hold their hands while they get the application filled out.
So it's kind of accountability that those tutors can operate as kind of an accountability coach too.
Right.
It'd be actually cheaper to hire an accountability coach.
But I say about the essays, like that's one area where I would not over tutor, because the colleges are for many reasons. The kids should be putting their own thoughts into the essays. Yes, it's unfair to ask a 16 or 17-year-old to make a personal statement because they're just not used to it. And in fact, even a lot of 30-year-olds are not used to it. But my cousin sent me something that it was one of her friend's kids, an essay, and it was clear that a lawyer had written it because the word heretofore was in it.
That's not good.
And certainly if that jumps off the page at me, it's going to jump off the page at the
absolutely. That's ridiculous. Okay. So the testing resources sounds like if you can find a good one-on-one tutor, do that. The Princeton Review and Kaplan sounds like, I don't know, do you have any thoughts on those resources?
I think it's going to depend on where you are.
Oh, right, you should depend on the tutor that you have in some of those places.
Yeah, and so here in LA, there might be a famous tutor at Princeton who everyone wants, or a famous tutor at Kaplan.
I see, yeah, so if there's that fit, do that. Okay, and then, all right, so here's the thing that I was shocked. So we've been going to, first of all, there's U.S. News Report. We're looking like, which are the schools should we go to go visit? Right. We're going to the Midwest. So we look at all the schools that we should go look at. And then we look at the U.S. News Report, and I swear every single one of them has 34 as their ACT score. And I thought, Are they all just, kids in the 98th percentile? Are those the only kids that get into these selective schools? Or what's happening that, they can be going to Harvard or Skidmore or wherever, and it's like the same darn score?
Okay, well, there's two things. First of all, the ACT is a kinder, gentler test, and you can be more selective about which score you send in. So there are going to be, I mean, I don't know, I haven't done the actual research, but I do think that there are more kids that send in those high ACT scores than the ACT scores that get sent in are going to average out a little bit higher. Because if you also got a 30 or a 31, you just don't have to send them into the schools, most schools.
And that's I don't even understand that.
Yeah, the SAT is, they say that they're selective about it, but it's not. I mean, that's another whole discussion. We need an hour for me to explain it, but they're not, and they are changing with the new exam. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the schools are reporting they're only reporting the kids that got in that are starting in the fall semester. Like a lot of schools, like USC, like a lot of really great schools will just defer. Berkeley is another one that'll defer kids to the second semester, and then they don't have to send in their scores. So
okay, wait. So let me go back to so for the ACT, it seems like the conventional wisdom is that you want to take it 2 or 3 times.
Well, it depends, unless you do really well the first time.
Yeah, if you get all, triple 36, you get 36 on it, then you're done.
Then you're done.
But if you don't, you get 31s, 34s, 36s,
right,
and you're all over the place. Then there's a Superscore idea where you can take 3 tests and you can take your highest score of each of those things. And is then that what you submit to the school?
Yeah, well, then you'd have to submit all 3 exams. So, and they say that they're not going to look at the bad scores. I mean, I have that in the book too, but I just can't believe that if you have a 20, let's say it's a 36, a 24, and a 28, that they will just not notice the 24 and the 28. But that's what they say.
When we went to Duke admissions, the officer said we just picked their highest score.
Yeah, it's very possible that an assistant circles the highest one, and that's that.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Okay, got it. So then it makes sense to keep on taking those tests to get.
Well, they don't want serial test takers. That's the problem. Like, right. So if you've taken it 7 times, and you send in 7 scores, that they're going to notice that. Right. But with the ACT, you do have some leeway in not sending everything in. And you can also, there's like a morning after pill for both the SAT and the ACT, where you can cancel it before you find out your score. Let's say you stab yourself with a pencil, which did happen to my son during the AP exam. Mm-hmm. And he was bleeding and bled and whatever, dying the whole time. But he chose not to cancel his score, and he did okay. Right. But let's say that happens to you during the ACT. My ACT might be a good idea to just cancel the score and take it again.
Okay, but then there's the idea of this choice selecting. What does that even mean? That means that you could just throw it away like it never existed?
Well, you can do that, as I said, more easily with the ACT. The SAT is changing, and they claim that that's going to be the case, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether that's.
I see. Okay, it's like it's written in your permanent record, but with the ACT, you could just I had a bad day, I felt sick, I had a tummy ache, delete. Like you. Well, the morning after, but then there's also just don't report it. Right?
Well, also you don't. It's just easier to not send in as many ACTs. But you just brought up a good point about the permanent record. Someone had given me the tip, and I don't know if I should say this on the radio, but whatever, my kids are done. Yeah. To not have the scores automatically sent to your high school. Right. So, in other words, when your kid takes the test, you never know whether that's going to happen with the stabbing themselves, or just having an off day, or just not doing that well. So, if it's I would wait and send everything to the high school after you receive the scores, and not automatically have it sent there, because then it will, in a lot of schools, just go into the permanent record, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Then it's gone, and then it's there in the permanent for everyone to see. Right. Okay. So it sounds like you should take the test a couple different times. Don't do it like a 7 times, but 2 or 3 times. That's shocking to me. I don't think I took the SAT more than once. Maybe I was stupid, but I didn't. So the thought of taking it 2 or 3 times, because then Seems like you're a professional test taker, which to me seems like there's a trade-off in
Yeah,
doing that too.
and that increases stress, and it takes away
Yeah,
from the time you can be having fun your senior year.
yeah,
It's the last time or your junior year in particular, that you're. I mean, that age that when we used to think about being 16, it was a magical age,
yeah,
and now it's kind of like, oh my God, you have a junior. I'm so sorry.
yeah. It's awful.
So
How are
yeah,
they doing? How are they holding up?
yeah. So I think there's a balance there. And I think that one thing is to desensitize kids to the test. Like I said, the 20 minutes a day of practice, perhaps starting the summer before. If your kid is just not a test taker, look at that list of schools. There's some amazing schools. NYU right now is actually, they do require some tests, but you can send the subject tests instead of the actual SAT or the
Wow,
ACT.
that's great. That's
Yeah,
great because I think those are in some ways easier because they're easier to study for, and it shows that you really know a subject. I mean, you
and
know,
also it's something that you might be really great at. Like
yeah,
that AP that I mentioned, our school actually did not have APs, which was a great relief for our kids because the colleges say we just want to look at the most rigorous curriculum that you could have taken. So they still
ah,
took honors classes, and they called them advanced classes, but they were created by the teacher. But then
ah,
they chose to take APs just for, so once they got to Duke, that they would get credit for a couple of courses.
right,
So those courses, you would just choose something that you're good at.
yeah,
So
that
you
you
could,
enjoy and that you're good
yeah.
at. Yeah,
So
that's
you could
actually
choose two
easier.
math classes
Right.
if that's what you're, or two science classes rather than trying to seem well-rounded or anything.
Yeah. Okay, so I have another question about the um, numbers game. I think I read that you said people apply up to 29 to 40 schools, and my jaw just dropped. Was that just like an exaggerated number, or is that what people really are they really doing this, and why?
Well, as my husband says, I am an animation writer for a living, so I do exaggerate a little bit.
Okay.
But we did, no, we met a girl that applied to 36 schools, and I think in the old days the average number was three. I mean, I remember when I applied, and then it went up to around 9 or 10 in around when my older son was thinking about school. By the time he applied, it was 15 or 16, and now I think it's about 20. And
20
I mean,
schools now
in a
on
lot of
average.
places. But part of it is because of the Common App, where you can just click and send it. You know, once you filled out the Common App, you can just disperse it everywhere. So it's not that hard to apply to more schools. You just do it online, and that's that. A lot of schools, in fact, have gotten rid of their supplemental essays. So, like Boston College is one,
Oh,
where so you can just, if let's say you're not sure if you really care about Boston College or not, you haven't seen it, but it sounds great on paper, it's a good school. In the old days, you would have had to write this long essay about why you
right.
wanted to go there, but now you can just add that on. So that's one thing. I call that sort of amplification in the
Mm-hmm.
book.
Mm-hmm.
And another one is that a school that used to be a safety, like we just spoke about GW, that was a safety for a lot of people. Or in California, I do tend to talk about the California schools, but Santa Barbara was considered a safety, and certainly Santa Cruz, and
Right.
neither of those are
Yeah, not
anymore
anymore. Yeah.
at all. So in other words, if you're applying to GW now, you better also apply to American,
Right.
which is more of a safety. So that's another reason why kids are applying to more. And what happens is the college counselor might call you and say, I see you applied to Michigan. Why don't you apply to Wisconsin and Indiana and Kansas? Because those are the same kind of rah-rah big state schools, and they're just easier to get into.
I
And so
see. Got it.
that's where
Ah,
this
that's why
is
the
happening.
20. Why not
Yeah.
100? I mean,
And then, well, I actually have right here. And then the other thing that's happening is schools are marketing themselves to kids in a way that's never happened before, because you mentioned U.S. News.
right.
Trying to find. Okay, this school, I love this school, so forgive me if you think I'm saying something bad about it. Watch You in St. Louis.
Yeah.
It has a really stupid name. Like, why everyone has to call it in St. Louis, because when you say Wash U, or Washington
Yeah.
University,
George
you're thinking it's
Washington.
George Washington or University of Washington. So I think that's part of its problem. It's always a top 15 school.
Yeah.
It has amazing programs in pre-med, in basically everything. It's beautiful. It's no more than 2 or 3 hours away from anywhere in the country. And it has really interesting group of students. It's a great size. It has good food and unbelievable dorms. Okay, so why then do they have to send you something every single day, which was the case of my son? I mean, ironically, they would say, well, we have a great environmental ed program, yet you almost needed a dedicated forest
Exactly.
to put out these brochures. So what the schools are doing, does that mean that he would have gotten in there? Not necessarily. It just means they want you to apply so they have more applicants, and then their rankings go up because they seem more selective when they accept fewer kids.
I see. So that's a game the college is playing. They're trying to get, and then you were talking about the TUFT syndrome.
Yeah, well, colleges are marketing themselves.
Right.
And to kids so they can turn kids down. And that's a terrible thing. They don't like to be doing that, but they're beholden to U.S. News and World Report.
They're just trying to get a check. That's all they're trying to do, so they can say 20,000 people applied and we only accepted 1,000 or whatever.
That's right.
Number
That's
is.
right. Okay, so TUFT syndrome ties into this. So let's say you're someone who you're a Stanford kid, like you're completely qualified to go to Stanford or Harvard or Yale.
Right.
What are you going to use as a safety? A great school like WashU. Mm-hmm. So then what happens is WashU sees, oh my God, look at this kid. Well, they could easily get into Harvard or Yale or Stanford. Well, let's not accept them because clearly they're not our first choice. Right. And the reason it's called TUFT syndrome is because Tufts was most guilty of this for a while. I think they're not as bad anymore. Right. So then what will happen is they'll waitlist the kid. I mean, they'll defer or they'll waitlist the kid. And then they want to hear, there's something called demonstrated interest. They want the kid to come to them begging, saying like, oh my God, you were my first choice. I wanted to go. But they are hesitant to accept them if they think they're just using it as a safety. And that's called yield protection. Wow. And it's very complicated and very scary for both. And the colleges are not, the admissions officers are not happy about this, but they don't really see a way around it because of the stupid rankings by a third-rate news magazine. Like, who cares, really?
I don't even understand that, because I was looking at U.S. News Report, and my husband and I had a whole long conversation. University of Washington is a really, really
amazing. Yeah, I love it. It's
ranked 50, and I thought, what? And then we said, well, it seems like what's happening is they have these old legacy schools that it's like an incumbent in Congress. Like, it's really hard to dethrone them. So it's going to take a really long time before a school like University of Washington is going to go where it really rightfully should be. Like, University of Santa Barbara was probably that kind of school because it was always like, you know, when I went to school, it was like the safety school, like you said. Yeah. And now it's probably 20 or something like that.
Oh, no, I think it's lower. I mean, I think Georgetown is 20. Part of it is that their rankings are very arbitrary. Like, one of them is what percentage of full-time professors teach. Now, do you really care about, I mean, what percentage of... Yeah, like, do you care if some guy is away in Indonesia for the semester? You know, doing like, that doesn't bother me. And I was at Brown when someone asked that question, saying, you know, are your teachers really here teaching? Right. Like, if my kids are at Duke and someone is away working with the lemurs in Madagascar, I'm fine with that. Like, why should that? Why should that be a criteria? And they're also, some of them are looking at RateMyProfessor.com, which is interesting for kids when they're signing up for a class, but it's completely not scientific. Mm-hmm. And it shouldn't be. I'm not sure if it's part of all of the lists that U.S. News uses, but it's some of the lists. Yeah. And so a school like Washington is lower because the classes are larger, period. That's the reason. And the reason Michigan is so much higher, well, I don't know how much higher, but a little higher.
Oh, no, it's a lot higher.
Maybe it's like 25 or something. Yeah. Okay, well, they're dependent on a lot of out-of-state students, as is Wisconsin, so they have to look really appealing to the out-of-state students. And they have another great school in Michigan, Michigan State. So if not all the smart kids from Michigan get in, they can go to the state. And then that's how Michigan continues to operate on that high level, is by being more selective with the out-of-staters. Right. But what they do is they have something called, like, we make it small. And they talk about this during the info session. It's kind of, all of our freshman seminars only have 9 kids. So
at University of Michigan, so they
like their writing seminar or something. I mean, I don't know if that's it. I'm just making, but so that will make things average out much more. So if they have another class with 400 kids, but then they have one with 9, that's a lot better than if Washington has one with 35.
I see, right.
So they're playing with the numbers. There are certain schools that play the game and they do really well. Other schools like Reed, fantastic college, will say, you know what, this is ridiculous. I'm not part of it. We're not part of this. Done. We're not even sending you we're not answering any of your questions. And then they get rated like number 60 when really they should be like number 15.
Right. Interesting. So that's why it's so hard, because I'm looking at them, like, first of all, you're saying that the scores are they seem inflated. I think they must just take the Superscore, and they, like, I don't know, like, it just seems like everyone's getting is 98 percentile in these schools, which I can't believe is the case. You know, it's 98 percentile because they're the top 2%. It just defies.
Well, part of it is because a lot of these kids have been over tutored and over prepped and also there's so many international students, we haven't gotten to that. Yes. And the ones that apply internationally to the selective schools are impeccable. Like, I ran into a group of Koreans when I was at Penn with my son, and I had blogged about them, and I had said, this is impossible. How could you be from Korea and get an 800 on the English part of your SAT? But they had, because they were, either they were sent here to the U.S. and they lived here for a year just so they could take that test, or they lived in an English immersive environment in Korea. And it's interesting because everyone here is so threatened by Asia business-wise, yet all those, for whatever reason, those parents, or some of those parents, like the Chinese and the Indians in particular, and the Koreans, are dying to send their kids here. And I mean, someone said it's harder to get into University of Delhi if you're from Delhi than it is to get into Harvard.
And if you were to kind of look at your friends or family, or just generally from the parents that blog, what do you think is when does it work well and when doesn't it work well for empty nesting folks?
Well, I think that a lot of parents are the ones that were the supreme helicopter parents, who had dedicated every second to just being soccer moms and dads and doing everything for their kids, providing, if they were theater parents, providing every meal in the car and taking them to every audition and that kind of thing. Suddenly they have nothing in their lives because they're not doing anything anymore. So it's particularly hard for them. I've noticed that it's harder, just anecdotally, for people that don't live in cities. I think if you live in a city, there's a lot of stuff that suddenly you can do for not that much money that you've been depriving yourself from. And but if you're in the suburbs and it's a schlep to go in somewhere to even go to the movies, that can be a problem. I mean, binge watching has helped empty nesters everywhere.
I'm starting to do House of Cards, and I'm like episode 12, and I love it. But I get it. So it's just the loneliness and emptiness out of, like, the gap of what used to be where you spend your time to where you spend your time now.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I said, I think it was not in the book, but on the Huffington Post, is like, just take all the activities your kids have given up and just, like, go in and learn how to play that saxophone that's lying around, like all the expensive equipment you got for your kids.
Exactly.
So what it is, there's been this whole movement that if you don't study STEM, that you're going to just starve to death and never get a job. And nothing could be more untrue. So if you're the kind of kid like I was, where you're just much stronger as a writer, you most certainly can get a job. Firms like Microsoft and Google and the banks, Goldman Sachs, they still need someone to work in their marketing departments.
Yeah.
And do they want an English major? You bet. Do they want a sociology major? Yes. So it's not like you have to study computer science to get a job.
Yeah.
And you should really still go with what interests you. You know,
Yeah.
that whole anti-English thing.
Thank you so much. We've been talking to JD Rothman. We've been talking about her book, The Neurotic Parent's Guide. Thank you so much. What a wealth of information.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. Would love your support in any way by giving me comments below, or to subscribe to the show, or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.